Is the Xbox handheld worth it? So this is the brand new ROG Xbox Ally as well as the Ally X. Now I got an early look at this a few months ago. However, now that I'm able to do a full review, I have a lot of things to talk about. I think a very important bit of context is not only what the Xbox Ally is, but also discuss the fact that this launch is happening at a unique time. Look, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. Xbox has had a rough year. The Series S went from $300 to $400. The Series X jumped from $500 to $650. Game Pass Ultimate just went from $20 to $30 a month. Not to mention the fact that there's just been this constant stream of rumors and speculation about whether or not Xbox is even committed to hardware. And this is their answer for handheld gaming. It is a partnership with ASUS to create what they're calling the Xbox full screen experience on a Windows handheld. If you're confused what that mouthful means, you're not alone. So let's figure out what exactly is the Xbox Ally. So first of all, we have the standard ROG Xbox Ally, which comes with a Ryzen Z2A processor, 16 gigs of RAM, 512 gig SSD, and a 60 watt-hour battery. It's also got a 7-inch 1080p LCD display at 120 Hz with VRR, and this will run you a grand total of $600. The Ally X bumps you up to the Z2 Extreme chip, 24 gigs of RAM, a 1TB SSD, and an 80 watt-hour battery. More importantly though, it is $1,000, a full $400 more than the standard Xbox Ally. Now, Ken over on Denki has a full deep dive on the ROG Xbox Ally X, so if that's what you're considering, but for me, I'm gonna mostly be focusing on the more basic, simple version because I'm gonna be real, $1,000 is a tough sell for a handheld. The more time I spend with these handhelds, it really crystallizes something for me. The handheld market is split into really two tiers right now. You've got the lower tier, which is around $550, $600. So think things like the Steam Deck OLED at $550, the Xbox Ally at $600, there's the Legion Go S, which is also around $600. These are all targeting the same 720p outputs. They've all got 2 to 3 hours of battery life, and as we'll talk about in a minute, they've all got pretty similar performance. And then you've got the upper tier at $1,000 or more. So that includes stuff like the Xbox Ally X, the Legion Go 2, which can start at $1,100 and go on from there. I mean, these all have bigger batteries, they have faster processors, they target 1080p, but in my opinion, that upper tier, it does start to get into the territory of, why not just buy a gaming laptop? I mean, we're talking about over double the price of a Switch 2. All right, so before we even talk about playing games on this thing, we need to talk about getting it up and running, because this is still a Windows PC. Now, to be fair, the review units that we got required a little bit more setup than the retail units will, but even in the best case scenario, here's what you're looking at. A Windows 11 update, an Xbox app update, a BIOS update, AMD driver updates, updates for ROG's Armory Crate, and multiple restarts along the way. Now, to be super clear about this, you don't actually have to do all this right out of the box. Once you do the initial Windows update, you'll be in the Xbox interface, it'll be fine, but you still really need to dive into Armory Crate and update all the various drivers. You should still probably open the Windows update in your desktop mode and update that. Like, it's better than it was before, which is crazy to say, but it is not a streamlined console-like experience. Now, this is mostly a day one kind of issue because when you first unbox your Ally, you'll do all this stuff and then it'll be easier going forward. But compare all this to the Steam Deck, where you turn it on, it downloads an update, and then you just log in. You're done. When you get future updates, there's one button that says, hey, you want to update? And you say yes, and then 30 seconds later, you're done, right? Like, you're gonna start seeing what I mean by this is questionably a real Xbox. All right, so once you're actually set up, what is the Xbox full screen experience? Now, I want to be very clear about this because the marketing, I think, has been very confusing up until this point. This is not a custom version of Windows. It's not Windows 11 Xbox Edition. It is Windows 11 with a new mode that launches by default. So when you turn on the Ally, instead of booting into the Windows desktop, instead you go directly into the Xbox app. So this is running in full screen as all apps do in this mode, and it's designed for controllers. And it actually tries really hard to feel like a console interface. Honestly, it is kind of successful. Sure, sometimes when you're opening regular Windows apps like settings, you will have to go to the touchscreen, but the vast majority of the time, you're not trying to tap on tiny Windows UI elements that were never designed for a 7-inch touchscreen. Now, that alone is huge. On previous Windows handhelds, the reliance on the touchscreen was an absolute deal breaker for me. Moving between launchers, apps like Epic and Steam, and doing normal Windowsy stuff. I mean, it absolutely ruined the handheld experience. This new full screen experience also does some clever stuff under the hood. It's reducing background processes when you're gaming by not loading non-essential Windows tasks. So the way it works is when you launch a game from the Xbox app, it is only loading what you actually need instead of every piece of Windows load in the background. Now sure, you can override this. You could launch Discord or OneDrive or Skype, rest in peace, but they're not sucking resources in the background automatically. Actually, you can't load Skype. Actually, what happens if you try to load Skype now? Does it just tell you that you should use Teams and be sad about it? Microsoft have also opened this initial launch mode to third parties. So theoretically, Valve could update Steam to allow you to just boot the Xbox Ally directly in the Steam Big Picture mode without needing the Xbox app interface at all. This is rad. I was actually surprised when I was talking to them about this, that this is a mode that they built in. It's not like you're locked into always launching the Xbox app. You know, for example, I don't know, maybe Epic Game Store could be one of the things that you automatically load, or whatever the case is. This is just a setting in the full screen experience. And I think it's a big part of why they've re-architected Windows in the way that they have. And if you do need the full Windows desktop, it's there. So there's a button that will launch the desktop mode. Now that does load in an extra couple of gigs of RAM for all the Windows background stuff, but I'll say I rarely need to do this. So the full screen experience works pretty well for multitasking. You just have to tap and hold the Xbox button. You can move between apps. You can easily open and close them with the A and X buttons. And all apps by default run in full screen mode. So there's never going to be multiple windows on top of each other, even if the window that you're using is like friggin' 640 by 480. It would just have black borders around it. But I find that this is a much easier way to multitask and still have all the Windows apps that you expect. It may not be perfect, but there's no doubt that this is legitimately a lot better than what came before. But here's what's missing. Games don't sleep, most of the time. So unlike an Xbox console, there's no quick resume. You can put most games to sleep, but I've had games crash or do a very slow ramp back to normal speed, but even when it hits normal speed, it's still running at a lower frame rate than it was before I went to sleep. Like, I've ended up just closing games entirely and reloading them from scratch every time I sit down to play, which is less than ideal. On the Steam Deck, you can pause mid-game, and when you turn it back on, even days later, you are right where you left off within 2 seconds. On the Switch, same thing. It is such a part of my handheld gaming experience to pick up my Steam Deck, play 30 minutes, put it down, and then rinse and repeat the next day. And look, I get it that this is a hard problem to solve. You know, Windows Sleep Mode wasn't designed for games like this, but if you were putting the Xbox brand on a handheld and calling it the Xbox experience, not having this feature work reliably is an incredibly glaring omission. And there's still not a single place for all the updates to live. Like, I don't want to be too negative here, but it frustrates me because this software is a real improvement. It is by far the best Windows handheld experience that has ever existed. Controller navigation alone makes this viable in a way that previous Windows handhelds just weren't for me. But I think it's worth keeping in mind what this actually is. It is not a new operating system. It's Windows with a better coat of paint and some smart optimizations. And I think it's really going to come down to what your expectations are. Are you expecting an Xbox portable console experience? Well, you're gonna be disappointed because this is still fundamentally a PC. It just has a nicer interface and some Xbox features bolted on. But if you're coming from a previous handheld or a regular gaming PC, then there are legitimately big improvements here that does make it better. I mean, is it a step forward? Yes. Is it the destination? Not even close. So why don't we play a little bit of Fortnite, an excellent example of a game that does not support the Steam Deck in almost any way unless you want to install Windows and do a bunch of hacky weird nuts. Weird nuts? So there's a few things about this experience that I do really like. Again, like the way that the handles feel, it's comfortable. This is a big, heavy device, but it doesn't feel bad. Like, I really feel like it's pretty comfortable. I've spent like an hour and a half, 2 hours at a time, a couple of different positions. Like, it does not get uncomfortable in a way that something like the earlier Xbox Ally does. I also want to give a special shout out to the speakers. The speakers, even though they look the same as the previous Ally, they're really improved. I'm gonna crank them up to 100%. Okay, we're up and running. These speakers are really loud. Like, honestly, maybe the most noticeable improvement over the original Ally. They're so loud. No, I want the chest. Give me the chest, damn it. Careful. Parkour. I got a chainsaw. Oh, hell yeah, brother. Again, I want to be somewhat fair. I've gotten 3 updates in the last week for this thing. I'm recording this almost a week before actual launch, but it seems pretty clear to me that this is coming in maybe a touch raw. And theoretically, they will improve things, but it has not been the most seamless experience. But to be very fair to them, the Steam Deck also, let's not forget, was not the world's most stable, simple to use thing for the first like 6 months. Like I think that Valve did a really good job of continuously improving SteamOS. And I'd like to think that Microsoft will do the same thing with Windows on the actual Ally. The screen is fine. I'll say that it is a 1080p panel. It does run up to 120 FPS. And it does a VRR, all of which are improvements over the Steam Deck OLED, which is 800p, it's 90 Hz instead of 120, and it does not support VRR. The main difference though is that I find that the VRR doesn't matter that much because it only kicks in about 48 frames per second. In a lot of games I'm running it less than that, although here in Fortnite I'm getting like 80 FPS, which looks nice. I'd say it's more acceptable on the $600 Ally than it is on the $1,000 Ally X, where, let's be real, we should have like an OLED or something. Performance is good though, right? I think that pretty much every game I've tried is playable at like 720p. Right now I'm playing it actually a little bit above 720p on like medium to low settings. And I'm getting 80, 90 FPS for the most part. It's very, very playable. The downside though is that the performance is one thing, the capacity is another one. So Baldur's Gate 3 is one of my favorite games, and I had to uninstall it because I ran out of space. 3 games filled up the entire Xbox Ally SSD. So it's 512 gigs by default, you lose a bunch with Windows. And by the time I had installed Cyberpunk, Forza Horizon 5, and Fortnite, I had like 30 gigs left or something. Like I had to actually uninstall Baldur's Gate to install Fortnite, which is messed up. So I will say that Baldur's Gate runs fine, but I wish I had a 1 terabyte SSD. So before we jump into the benchmarks, I do want to talk about TDP for a second because I think it's really important for understanding what kind of performance you get on a handheld. So the concept of TDP is really simple. It's just how much power the chip is allowed to draw. So more power means more performance, but it also means worse battery life. It's a trade-off, at least unless you're plugged in which case, let it rip. So for context, the Steam Deck OLED is locked to 15 watts max. So it doesn't matter if you're on battery or you're plugged in, you can't push it above 15 watts, which really means that just Valve picked a number and they capped it there, which I'll say feels kind of console-like. You can push it lower if you're playing like a low-end game, but generally speaking, I never touched the TDP on a Steam Deck. On the other hand, the Xbox Ally gives you options. So most of the time it's gonna wanna run at 15 watts for better battery life. So if you tap the Armory Crate key, you'll see that we have a few modes. You've got silent, performance, turbo. Performance is normally what it wants to run at, but you do have that 20-watt turbo mode, which you can get for better performance. And I will say that in my testing, there's zero difference between whether you're plugged in or not, right? So whatever TDP is, that's the performance you're getting, battery, unplugged, whatever the case is. In comparison, the Legion Go S with the Z2 Go has a very different way of approaching things. That will let you run all the way up to 40 watts, which I will tell you is wildly impractical and drains battery even when it's plugged in. But for the testing purposes at least, I focused on the 15 and 20 watt modes to match the Ally and what the Steam Deck will give you. So we've spent the last week doing battery tests and benchmarks, and there's a couple of really interesting things. One of the big takeaways is that the Steam Deck OLED straight up has better battery life than the Xbox Ally. So specifically using a Forza Horizon 5 test, at 15 watt TDP, the Steam Deck got 2 hours and 43 minutes, whereas the ROG Xbox Ally only got 2 hours and 24 minutes. Now, that might not seem like a big deal, but keep in mind that the Steam Deck has a smaller battery, 50 watt hour versus 60 watt hour on the Xbox Ally. And as we'll discuss in a minute, the performance in the chip is quite similar, which pretty much points me to Windows is still really inefficient when it comes to battery life. Now, if you crank this up to 20 watts, it's even worse. It is less than 2 hours of battery. And that does not compare well with something like the Legion Go S, which is nearly 2 hours, even at its 20 watt mode. The only real winner here, outside the Steam Deck, is the ROG Xbox Ally X. That is a larger 80 watt hour battery. It has a more efficient Z2 Extreme processor, and that actually will get you almost 3 hours on its 17 watt mode. Now, a couple of caveats here, one of which is my Steam Deck actually is slightly underperforming what it should. So that's my personal Steam Deck we use for the testing, which means that I've been playing it for like 2 years, so the battery's probably degraded. In reality, the Steam Deck might be even closer to 3 hours. And I will also say that these are somewhat worst case scenario numbers because we're running Forza uncapped. So if you turn on like VSync or some kind of frame rate cap, you will save some battery. but it's not a great look that the ROG Xbox Ally is getting somewhere between an hour and 47 and 2 hours and 24 minutes, right? Like you're talking like 2.5 hours on the optimistic side in performance mode, not even in the turbo mode. That's not great. So one thing I think is really interesting to talk about is what exactly is inside the Xbox Ally. So it uses AMD's Ryzen Z2A processor, which is an exclusive chip for the Ally. Now, I had my suspicions when I first heard about this when it was announced, but I actually straight up asked the Xbox team, what is the Z2A? And I got a very corporate, very polished answer about how it's a custom chip designed for 720p gaming. Maybe with a little bit of a smile because I was like, hey, is this the Steam Deck chip? And I got a no comment, which I took to mean, figure it out yourself. And boy, oh boy, did I. So I have looked into this as much as I can, and as far as I can tell, the Z2A is 100% identical to the Steam Deck APU. It is the same architecture, it's the same core count, same number of GPU compute units, it's the same memory speed. If there's a difference here, I can't find it, because the only real difference is just the fact that this gives you a 20-watt turbo mode and the Steam Deck doesn't. But that's just purely Microsoft and ASUS just giving you a higher wattage option, right? The physical chip, as far as I can tell, is the same. Now keep that in mind when we're comparing these benchmarks. At 15 watts, the Xbox Ally and the Steam Deck OLED are running essentially the same chip. Now when you go to 20 watts, the Ally is pushing that chip a little bit more, but it should give you a good example of the tuning differences and the performance differences between Windows and SteamOS. Confusingly, the Legion Go S uses the Z2 Go, which is also exclusive chip, but it's actually a little bit better, technically, although as you'll see, not really. I feel like AMD's marketing for all these handheld chip names is just like, hey, alphabet soup, have fun. The Z2 Go uses a slightly newer CPU, so it's got Zen 3 Plus cores instead of Zen 2. It has a slightly larger GPU, but importantly, it's not as well optimized for lower wattages the same way that the Ally and the Steam Deck are. So for our benchmarking, we ran 2 games at 720p, Forza Horizon 5 and Cyberpunk 2077, both on medium settings with FSR engaged. So in Forza, at 15 watts, the Steam Deck hits 55 frames per second. The Xbox Ally, 53, pretty much identical. Now, interesting, the Legion Go S struggles at 15 watts, hitting only 44 frames. But when you crank the Ally up to 20 watts, you're actually able to clear 60 FPS, and it gives you about a 13% lead. The Legion, though, needs that 20 watts just to catch up to the Steam Deck. Now, Cyberpunk is a little bit more interesting. So the Steam Deck, again at 15 watts, is getting 49 FPS with the custom Steam Deck preset, the same preset we used on all of our devices. Now the Ally with the same preset at the same wattage only got 36 FPS. At 20 watts, it's still behind the Steam Deck. So even with the extra power, the Ally isn't matching the deck in Cyberpunk. Now, I think that comes down to SteamOS optimization. I know that Cyberpunk loves to eat RAM, and even though it's hard to say for sure, my best guess is SteamOS just maybe leaving more memory than Windows is, or, I mean, it's possible that different settings might close the gap. But basically, right now, at least in Cyberpunk, the Steam Deck has not only the performance advantage, but it also has that performance advantage with better battery life. Also, a quick note on 1080p, so even though the Steam Deck doesn't have a 1080p display, this does, and it will play some games, especially lighter titles at 1080p, but when it comes to demanding titles, again, like Forza, you're gonna get like 46 FPS even when you're on the turbo mode. I mean, it's playable, and it's something you can do, but it's one of those things you're gonna have to sacrifice a lot of frame rate. I personally think Microsoft is right in pitching this as a 720p console that just happens to have a 1080p display. There is something that worries me a little bit though, and that's just the longevity. So this Z2A is essentially a 2022 chip. It is the Steam Deck APU as near as I can figure. More specifically, I believe it's the 6nm shrink from the Steam Deck OLED, but like, it's fine for today's games, but I mean, I think in 2 or 3 years, if we're looking at games like Cyberpunk looking at like 36, 40 FPS, is that really gonna feel acceptable? It's borderline. I would like more performance on a brand new $600 Xbox device. Speaking of higher performance, a quick word on the Ally X. So compared to the standard Ally, the Z2 Extreme here gives you in the neighborhood of like 30 to 40% better performance, a little bit higher depending on the settings. And that does mean that 1080p 60 is a thing that you can hit often. It also means you have a lot more headroom, right? So you can go for either higher settings, or if you really want to push close to like 120 FPS. But in our testing, if you compare to the Z1 Extreme in the, say, non Xbox ROG Ally X, it's actually only a few percent improvement. Now, those numbers do look better when you push it at lower power numbers. Again, the Z2 Extreme is more efficient, but if you already own an ROG Ally or Legion Go, do not expect a big performance boost with this chip. I think that if you were looking at these two as an option, it's a little hard to justify $400 more for this guy. So here's the question I keep coming back to. Is this actually an Xbox? Because Microsoft, they're putting the Xbox brand all over this thing. It's called the ROG Xbox Ally. There's an Xbox logo on it. The marketing is all about bringing the Xbox experience to a handheld. But this isn't an Xbox console. It is a Windows PC with Xbox features, and I think that distinction is incredibly important. You can't play your existing console library on this, so your digital 360, One, or Series X games, they won't work here unless they have a cross-device entitlement, which basically just means like stuff like first-party games like Halo will work, mostly. Otherwise, you're going to be going to Game Pass or a third party like Steam. Now, to be fair, many people will value their Steam library more than their Xbox library, and the Xbox Ally does have the advantage of playing pretty much every PC game ever in a way that not even the Steam Deck can match. But it depends on who you are. If you're someone who is coming from the console side of things, you might not have a Steam library, you might not care about that. You might have a decade of digital games you purchased that almost all of which will not work on this, or at least a huge chunk will not. Think stuff like Baldur's Gate. You bought an Xbox, you're gonna have to buy it to get on the Ally. And then there's no quick resume. So I hope this improves. But right now, putting a game to sleep is just unreliable enough that I don't bother. And then there's the setup and the updates and the maintenance. And look, I've been talking about this a lot in this video, but I think it's important because yes, this stuff is smoother here than a regular PC handheld or a gaming PC or whatever, but like having multiple update systems, dealing with drivers, like the worst parts of Windows are all still here. And the best parts, but the worst parts. So if you want a handheld gaming PC, what should you actually buy? Well, if you're primarily a Steam user and you don't specifically need Windows exclusives, I'll be honest with you, the Steam Deck OLED at $550 is still the better buy. You're getting a better display, I mean significantly better. The OLED versus the LCD makes a big difference. Even though on paper, the spec of the Xbox Ally is higher resolution, higher frame rate, but that OLED looks so good. You're also getting better software polish on SteamOS as well. It's more refined for handheld gaming, and you're also getting sleep and resume that just works. Now, yes, the Ally can push slightly higher frame rates if you crank it to 20 watts, and of course, this is version 1. They are almost certainly going to be spending the next several years improving the software experience. But for most people, I don't think that some small gains in performance and some potential for future updates is worth giving up the entire experience. I mean, the Steam Deck is $50 cheaper, it's a more cohesive product in my opinion, and also, that's entirely ignoring there's a $399 version of the Steam Deck, the LCD version. It's not that far off the OLED or the used market. Like, there's a lot going for the Steam Deck. Now, if you value Windows game compatibility, I actually do think there's an argument for the standard Xbox Ally being actually pretty solid. Games such as Fortnite, Destiny 2, stuff with anti-cheat that doesn't work on SteamOS, or maybe you're just really invested in Game Pass or Battle.net. Well, if any of these things are true, the Xbox Ally is absolutely your best option. Bottom line, the ROG Xbox Ally represents real progress for Windows handhelds. The full screen experience is a genuine step forward. And look, it's a complicated time for Xbox. I mean, I hate to say it, but like this device, it represents a step forward, but it's a compromise. And whether or not you think that step forward is a big enough thing to warrant spending $600 or $1,000 over these entirely depends on what you need from a handheld. Do you want a console experience? Then you should buy a Switch 2 or Steam Deck. Are you coming from a PC background and you're okay with a little bit of extra work? Then there is a lot of value here. But I gotta say, for me, as much as I've enjoyed testing it, I'm gonna be going back to my Steam Deck OLED, at least for now. God, I just felt like I said like Linus. Ick. Ick. Ugh. Ugh. Ew. Ew, I accidentally said like a Linusism. If you enjoyed this video, definitely be sure to subscribe to the channel and ring-a-ling that ding-a-ling button. And if you're interested, you can check out our recent video on the Switch 2, where we blind tested people to see just how powerful it was. Other than that, thank you very much for watching. I mean, I'm genuinely curious to see where Microsoft take this, because the foundation, it's solid. They just need to keep building on it.